episode, Millennials to Millionaires. I'm Alicia Ace West.
I'm Twee Estate.
Daniel King Sold.
And this episode, we are talking about renting versus owning. And so I will say that I'm a renter. I don't know when I'm going to own. The goal is to own. But right now, the way everything is set up, I feel like I'm going to be renting for a little bit longer.
Okay.
And since I'm here with two professionals, let's talk about it. What's the difference? What should I be doing in the city specifically? Like what's good? Let the people know what's good.
So you're a renter.
Yes.
But it's not a bad thing.
Okay,
so if you could...
Because there are perceptions that renting is very bad.
No, so we're here to kill that stigma.
Okay.
Renting is not a bad thing.
Okay.
It depends, though.
All right.
So renting, if you can buy where you can afford and rent where you want to live, that's a good principle to live by.
That's the key, because a lot of people say they want to live in Toronto, and the average condo price is what?
So the average home price in the GTA is $943,000.
That's a house, though.
A house.
Okay.
Not a condo.
And what's a condo?
Not a house. I mean,
condos are probably
Condos probably like 500.
No, not that cheap.
I'll tell you.
He's going to pull the stats, but as he pulls that, I'm going to tell you that a lot of people are going to try to save up to that 900,000 because they live in Toronto, they work in Toronto, all their family is there. So they don't necessarily think of, okay, you know what? Let me buy a property in Niagara Falls. Let me buy a property in Brampton or Mississauga, where it might be a bit more affordable per se. Essentially, you buying another property doesn't mean necessarily you have to live there. There's so many different options, so many different plays that you can do. You could rent it out. You could Airbnb it. There's so many different options. But the key is a lot of people, they live in the mindset that they have to live where they're owning as a primary residence. And that's not always the case, because let's say you can only afford something that's $300,000 or $400,000. That's all you can get qualified for a mortgage. That doesn't mean that you should save up for 10 years or, until you have that down payment to buy in Toronto. Because essentially by making some wise investments, some smart moves, maybe you can buy something in Niagara for $300,000. You rent it out. Somebody's going to be paying down your equity. The property is going to be growing in appreciation. Maybe in 2 or 3 years' time, that property is worth $500,000. At that point, you can sell, and then you can take the proceeds and the profits from that
And then put it towards
something in Toronto or something close to home if you want. Or you can pull the equity out of that, refinance, and get another property, right? But a lot of people just think in the mindset that they have to live where they own, and that's not necessarily the fact.
Okay, got you. I mean, that makes sense, because it's like, for me, I rent a condo right now and I'm like, okay, I want to own something. But when I look at prices in the city, because realistically I need to live close to the city, it's like just not possible right now, right? And so essentially it's okay that I rent, but maybe I should take that extra money that I do have saved up and that I continue to try to save to own my own property and using it on the outskirts of Toronto. Were you able to?
Yes. So let's get back into the numbers, shall we?
So
we want stats. We want receipts.
So the average condo price is $680,000.
About $700.
Okay. And the average home price is about $940,000. So let's take a home example for instance. So at $900,000, you're not going to qualify with CMHC. Just forget.
And what's
that.
CMHC?
CMHC is Canadian Housing Mortgage Corporation. Okay. They're the ones that insure your mortgage if you were to default, that sort of thing. You can just assume that's not going to happen.
So that's whenever you're putting down less than 20%.
Less than 20%.
Okay.
So let's say at $900,000, for easy number sakes, you're at $180,000 down.
Plus closing, call it $2.
Let's call it $200. So now you're mortgaging $700,000. $700,000 did the numbers at, let's say, 2.5% interest rate. Interest rates are low, but let's be conservative. 2.5, you're at about $3,500 a month.
That's
not including property tax, not including maintenance, not including
home insurance.
So let's call it $4,000. All right. So let's call it $4,000. That $4,000 mortgage house, you could rent that house for about $3,000. So you can save $1,000 if you were to just rent that house. But you would still need to own something. So now you go to these outskirts, you pick up a townhouse in Niagara or one of these outskirts, go up north, go Barrie, Innisfil, one of those places that are booming right now, and you pick up a townhouse, let's say $400,000-$500,000. Now you have that rented out. Maybe your mortgage there is about $2,200. After it's all said and done, you're at 25, let's say, and you're renting it out for $2,000. You're running a deficit of $500. Now you're running a deficit of $500, and you're paying $3,000 to live in the city, and collectively you're only spending $3,500 as opposed to $4,000 you would have if you were living in that same house and owned it. But now it's not so bad because somebody is still paying you. Someone is still paying your mortgage. So you still have an investment. You're still yielding equity. You're still building wealth, but you're living where you want to live, not where you have to live.
So question, would you not want the person renting your house to cover like all the costs? Is that typical or is it not?
Nowadays, because prices are astronomically high, that's a rare thing to happen nowadays where people can break even on investments. It's a common theme. I have a few of my rental properties I run a deficit on, and that's just how it is because the property was so expensive.
Okay, so you're not taking an L if you have to pay like a couple $100.
Think of it as like a high interest savings account. It's like if I'm chipping in 3 bills, but I'm getting back $2,500. You know what I mean? Look at the multiple on it. It's like 800% on your money.
So just change your perspective.
That's all you have to do.
And that's why, well, me personally, I focus in more secondary markets because buying in the GTA is quite unaffordable, and
it's so
stressful. Like you said, like you're running at a deficit. Where if you're purchasing in places like Niagara, Ottawa, places that are secondary markets that aren't as expensive as the GTA, you are still able to actually break even or even cash flow, right? So you're able to make a few $100s every month as opposed to losing a few $100s. And when it comes to renting, like I said, it's not always a bad thing, but you have to rent with a plan.
Okay.
Like I was even reading Beyonce and Jay-Z, they rent their house and it's $5 million a year for rent, but they're renting it, right? There are certain tax advantages that come along with renting as well. You're able to write off certain living space if you're a business owner as office and stuff like that. So there are certain things that you can do. And like you said, when you're renting, you're not worrying about home insurance. You're not worrying about land transfer tax. You're not worrying about maintenance and roofs and so on and so forth. So I'll give you a real life example for myself. I was living in a semi-detached I purchased January 2018. It was a small house, probably like 1,600 square feet. My total monthly carrying costs were about $2,500. Okay. That included pretty much all of my expenses. Now, I wanted to move from that house. I wanted to kind of get something a little bit bigger. So I had the option of, tying up 100, 200 grand and buying something else, or renting out my current house and just renting somewhere else, right? So that's what I ended up doing. I rented a $1.5 million house, 5 bedrooms for $2,700 a month.
Damn,
where? In Brampton, right by Mayfield at Mississauga Road.
God damn.
Yeah, you gotta come out here to the city. But so I was renting that house for $2,700 a month.
Yeah.
I rented out my house for $3,000, right? I ended up finishing the basement, so I was able to get $3,000 for the upstairs and downstairs. So I was bringing in $500 cash flow from that property. So essentially, by me moving out into a bigger house, a brand new house, and renting, I was essentially paying $2,700 minus the $500. So I was essentially paying $2,200 to live in a house twice the size that was brand new. So it made sense for me.
That's where you're winning.
Yeah.
That's where you're winning. And right now, because of COVID, you see that a lot of landlords are faced in certain situations now. There's a lot of units available for rent. Rent right now has dropped 10.1%.
Oh, wow.
over year. So that means that now may be a good time for people to look at rental options, but still be conscious of the fact that you still have to own something. Ownership is the key, is the name of the game regardless. But if you need to be in the city, if you need to be in certain places, if you want to be close to family, friends, and all that kind of stuff, then renting is not a bad thing. It's okay to live. It's okay to live where you want to live, but you have to own.
Because I'm in a point right now where it's like I live in a condo, 1-bedroom condo. It's not the largest. It does the job. The rent is pretty good. I'm only paying $1,600. and it's like I got a 1-bedroom, 1.5 bath, a parking spot, and
That's a good
a
deal.
locker,
Yeah.
right? So I'm winning, and I'm like, but I kind of want like a townhouse now. I want to be able to have multiple bedrooms. I want to just be able to have a little bit more space. And so I want to buy, but I'm all like, and then I don't also want to like leave the everything that I have. So it's just like maybe right now is a great time to leave because there's so many more like options available too. I realized that a lot of people like left, they moved out of their condos and stuff like that, moved back with their parents or moved back home if they're not from Toronto. So I guess right now would be a great time to maybe find something that is around the same price or maybe a little bit more, and then just continuing to like, you know, save and look at options outside of the city.
Definitely.
So you guys are developing property, like Daniel, you guys are developing property in Niagara Falls.
Yep.
How much are those? Because are they houses or condos?
They're stacked townhouse condos.
Yep. And so how much are they going for?
As cheap as, you know, 300,000 and as much as, you know, 500. So
It kind of just depends on how big.
yeah, how big the square footage you're looking at, what level you're going to be on. But it's a great investment for first time home buyers. Like I said, we have a flexible deposit structure over a few years. So essentially, you know, you're not paying, you know, an astronomical price. You might be able to put down $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 a year for the next 3 years. Your money is multiplying for you. So by the time it's built, you could be up a really good amount because appreciation happens every year. So that's key. And going back to talking about renting, is as long as you're renting with a plan, I think it's a good idea.
Just have vision.
100%. Like, for example, even me making that choice to rent instead of buying another house, you know, opportunity cost is very important as well. So that money that I would have tied up to purchase another property, now I was able to invest that to a development opportunity. If a business opportunity was able to come my way, it's not only the cost of purchasing something, but opportunity cost is the cost of things that you're missing out because you're not liquid. And the name of the game is to be as liquid as possible in business. So when opportunities come by, you don't
flexible.
You don't let them pass you by.
And honestly, like, realistically, we're all trying to like live here for the long haul. You know what I mean? We're not trying to just rush everything. Like, it's okay if you want to take your time to like own more properties or own even your first property. There's no age limit on when you need to own a property. I think a lot of times, especially with social media, we get these images that we have to own like so young. But even if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s and you've never owned a house, like you can still do it, right? You can still do it. Don't think that you're like stuck. But also you don't have to try to own all of these. It's not like Monopoly. Like, let me try to grab all the houses right now. You ain't got to do that. You can wait, right? There's all these goals that we want to like achieve so quickly. Like, just plan it out and have some space.
No, it's definitely a process.
Yeah.
To build a real estate portfolio is going to take time. It's going to take a lot of understanding. It's going to take a lot of tuning into M2M, a lot of other platforms that can give you gems and allow you to understand what this game is really about.
Yeah.
But essentially, you do want to sort of see it kind of like Monopoly. Yeah. Right. You got to sort of accumulate these things, but it's all about timing. Right? You can't rush it. You definitely can't rush it.
Because it's even like when we spoke about it in other episodes, like selling at the right time too, right? Like key. You've made mistakes where you could have held out a year or two because you really didn't need to sell it and make so much more money, but you've, you know, sold it too quick.
Yeah, timing is everything. And like I said, when you're renting, like my mom and my family, we rented, you know, our entire life, right? I was, you know, able to break that generational curse and be the first person in my family to actually purchase something. But I just seen us almost like a hamster on a wheel year after year. And here we are building other people's dreams, that other people that had a plan. Yeah. You know what I mean? And without a plan, I just feel like you're just destined to fail. You know what I mean? It's okay to be renting, but if you say you're going to rent for a year, you're going to save up $10,000, $15,000, you're going to buy a pre-construction, you know, so that money is making money for you in the meanwhile, you know what I mean? So by the time that's built, you could sell it on assignment, you could flip it, you could rent into it, and you don't really have to sacrifice the quality of life. You don't have to buy in Niagara thinking, oh man, I got to now commute back and forth to Niagara every day. Realistically, people are working from home now, so I guess it wouldn't be too bad. But if you did have to commute back and forth to work, you don't really have to think like, you know, that has to be your principal residence. You
Yeah.
know, people have to think with the mind of being investors.
Okay, so maybe like what does a plan look like, right? Because you've said multiple times we need to have a plan. So we can use me as an example or somebody else. What would be like the first steps in, creating this plan to ownership?
I think you'd have to identify what essentially you want out of it. If you're trying to achieve one property, two properties, you kind of have to identify what you want. So for you, for instance, maybe you'd want to own something, but you can't afford to leave. So now let's look at viable options out of the city. You're looking at Nair, you're looking at Innisfil, you're looking at Ottawa, you're looking at any one of these places. But that property that you invest in has to be able to yield something that can counteract the expense that you're paying in rental payments. So if you say, okay, I'm going to rent for these next 2-3 years while this place closes or while this place builds before it closes, then when it's done and it's closed, then maybe I'm going to go live there. Maybe after 3 years, I'll know that my job can now, I can work.
Flexible.
It's more flexible. I can work remotely. I only have to come into the office or the studio 2-3 times a week. So I could live over there and commute and only have to be inconvenienced 2 or 3 days a week. But essentially, if there's no end in sight, then people will find themselves on this treadmill where they're just renting and renting forever because it's so comfortable. You get so used to it. It's like, oh, okay, I'm only paying $1,600. Like if I own this, it would have cost me $2,500. So I'm winning. Sure, in the short term, but in hindsight, you're losing because you haven't leveraged your capital. So as long as you have a plan to leverage the capital that you've accumulated, then the renting is not a bad thing, right? And you has to have a duration, has to have an end term. There can't just be this indefinite rental period and you don't know what you're gonna do, year after year.
Yeah. Any advice you want to throw in?
Pretty much, yeah, exactly what Twee was saying. Like, if you don't have an end in sight, you're gonna be a hamster on a wheel, and that's what I feared for myself and my family. It was just like, when is this gonna end? You know what I mean? And then, you have things that come along like COVID, and it's just like you're not making money, and it's just like, okay, now you're looking around at your assets and you don't have any. And now it's like you're just depending on the government. And that's one of the main reasons why we're here today. We're trying to instill all these principles so that everybody can understand, like, take control of your life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, instead of paying off someone else's mortgage, building someone else's dreams, formulate a plan. Speak to Twee, speak to myself, speak to somebody that is experienced in this industry. And it's going to require sacrifice. Don't get me wrong.
For sure.
You might have to not buy, as many kicks as you want to have. Like, you know what I mean? For me, like, I loved cars, and growing up, like, I had to stop buying cars, and I drove beaters. I drove Civics, and, I had to park around the block, and, I wasn't proud, but, at the end of the day, I made a few sacrifices for, 2 to 3 years in the beginning when I was saving up for my first property. And after taking that first leap of faith, everything from there is a lot easier.
Yeah.
Once you get the first one, you make your first sale, you get that check, you get inspired. And then it's just like, okay, let me now invest in another property. Let me build it up 100%. So that's what I would definitely recommend. Just have an end goal in sight, have a plan, and don't let life just live you. You have to live your life.
Okay, so some takeaways from this episode is that if you're renting, it is okay. Just figure out a plan on how you can own in the near future. Start saving some coins, and including cutting back on things like Uber Eats, because we know Twee has a ridiculous Uber Eats account bill.
Yeah, you got to give us some cooking lessons. I see what you're cooking on your stories.
Chef Ace, hey, cutting back on shoes, whatever. Especially right now, like, we can't do anything. You're no longer going to the clubs and popping bottles. You're no longer having to get dressed.
I don't do those things anyways.
I'm not saying you. I'm just saying no. I'm saying in general to whoever's watching.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have these crazy like social lives outside of our houses
There's no
anymore.
excuses right now.
Yeah, like, we do not need to be spending money on clothes and all that other stuff because we really ain't got nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So start using that money so that you can save and use it for the bigger picture, which is eventually owning and looking at markets outside of where you live right now, because you do not have to own where you live. So who's got the book of the episode?
Book of the episode today. Thank you, Mr. Tweet Estate, for that nice slide. We got the Millionaire Real Estate Agent. For those who actually do want to get into real estate as a profession, this is a great book. It kind of brings you through A to Z. I read it and I applied a lot of things to my career. But yeah, whether you're investing yourself, whether you are going to be a landlord, if you're going to be a tenant, if you're going to be an agent, this is a very, very key book. I highly, highly recommend it.
All right. And our quote of today's episode is, real estate cannot be lost or stolen, nor can it be carried away. Purchased with common sense, paid for in full, and managed with reasonable care. It's about the safest investment in the world.
Safe money, 100%.
And that's that. That's another episode of the Millennials to Millionaires podcast. I'm Alicia Ace West.
I'm Tweet Estate.
I'm Daniel King Sold.
And thank you for listening.